All right. So this is Mignon Brooks, host of the Miracle Network Recovery. This is our first show. Our first show, I call it Outside of the Rooms, because, for those of us in recovery, we're used to like sharing our experience, strength, and hope inside of the rooms. And so my hopes from this show is to really encourage those who are still sick and suffering, alcoholics, drug addicts, who need help and don't know what the rooms are like or don't know what recovery looks like for them, because recovery can look like a very scary place. And, I hope that this show encourages people to find what's available for them. So as my very first guest, I decided to contact Melissa. Melissa is, oh my gosh, we've been friends for, I can't even quantify it. for a while. And I met Melissa inside the rooms, and I was her sponsor for like a short tidbit, but then we just always maintained friends. We both had kids around the same time. Our kids have played together, so it's all good. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So as we talked about right before we got started, I, wanted to like do all this prep work, give you some questions, have them prepared for you like a week in advance. And thank God for recovery. I stopped overthinking it and said, you know what, we're just going to hop on here and we're just going to get started. So if you could start off and, obviously not going off into a long explanation, but just giving me a small glimpse of like your experience, your strength, and your hope as we do inside the rooms of AA.
Yeah, of course. It's, I guess the short version would be that I never kind of thought I would be, someone that would identify eventually with having like alcoholism or any sort of addiction. And I just want to say that because I think whenever anyone I've worked with or come across like starts to work on their addiction recovery, it's like it's hard to get to that place of admitting that we could be suffering from this problem, like because a lot of us have this picture in our mind of like what addiction is or looks like. And for me, it was not the same picture, like snapshot of what I grew up seeing as addiction. So I just want to put that out there because that's like very much the forefront of my, like when you talk about like my snippet or my background, like my little history, like that would be like the theme.
That's huge. That's huge. I struggled with that too. I didn't feel like I looked like what I thought it would look like to be someone who was addicted or having an alcohol problem. I get it.
Yeah, so that was like the challenge for me, probably the first few years of like, figuring out if I was going to kind of get help or not, was, I don't know, you know what I mean? I don't know if it's for me, like, and when I got sober, it was a little bit, well, I should say I had a drinking problem, probably hinted to that. So I had a drinking and a little bit of like a medication abuse problem throughout my late teens and early 20s.
Okay.
And that was from, I would say, a combination of like genetics and also now that I've had a lot of recovery and a lot of like, AA and therapy and things like that, I could say like it was definitely like a self-medication of grief. So that was definitely the start of my issue. And when I eventually stopped drinking, I was 25. So I was pretty like young, by the community of like the people I was around standards, although which, because we were in the same kind of home groups and things like that, there was a lot of young people in those groups, which was very helpful in the beginning. But yeah, so my story is kind of like, I got sober really young. I was able to stay sober right from the beginning, which is not, again, not really average.
That's not my story.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like most people I meet, they're like, yeah, there's been a lot of not stopping and starting relapsing, which is totally normal. But yeah, So once I kind of stopped, I've stayed stopped. It's been 11 years, and,
I'm so
and
proud of you.
thank you. And yeah, it's just been a lot of like unlearning things, learning new things. Yeah, I'm a therapist now.
I was
So
going to ask you about that. Like,
yeah,
explain what it is you do now for people in recovery, because I think it's
yeah. So I started out, as a intern. So this is like 10 years ago, actually. So 2014, I was an intern at a women's trauma program, and also before that, even like a middle school and a high school. So that was like my first experience with becoming a therapist. And then once I became licensed, I kind of worked mainly in trauma recovery and addiction recovery ever since. So I guess like the last 8 years, I've been doing mostly like um, adult therapy with adults, and it's it changes between like the range of different ages, but
Mhm.
started out for a long time mainly only with women,
Okay.
in a women's trauma recovery program. But because of my personal background, I was put mostly with the addiction and trauma.
Huh.
So
I think when I first met you, you were still working with the women. So that's interesting.
yeah, yeah. So my boss, who has a similar background as me at the time, she ended up putting me in mostly the addiction groups. So I was, that was like my clinical like experience with
Yeah.
addiction recovery. But at the same time as that, I was also like in AA and involved in AA and speaking and like sponsoring people. So it was this kind of like double world thing going on where I was like clinically involved in therapy world of trauma and addiction recovery. And then also like my personal life was a lot of, meetings, and that's kind of where we met and connected, and yeah, sponsoring and sharing and kind of finding my own kind of way.
Journey. Yeah.
It was very like mirrored. I felt like a lot of the stuff I was doing in that program that I no longer work in that program.
Okay.
That was 5 years of my life. So a lot of my stuff I was doing in that program, I was like also kind of doing in my personal life at the same time. It was very interesting.
I
Yeah.
get it. And I think that is one of the reasons I think that is so interesting, because I feel like a lot of us inside the rooms um, are living a very much so dual life, where
Mhm.
like it's like, I can't even explain it, but we all know what it is. Like, if you're inside the rooms, you get it, because it's like, you see someone out, let's say, and you know them from the rooms. It's like a love that you can't really express to anybody, like that you can't really explain to anybody else, as I'm having trouble doing now. And so I think it's really interesting that what you were doing at work was mirroring what was going on in your personal life. And so that's like that's like amazing, because a lot of people are at work and can't be who they are in their recovery. Although I will say that a lot of the principles that we learn, regardless if it's AA or whatever, you still use, because they're applicable for life, period. I mean, that's the whole point of recovery, is like learning how to live. What do you think one of the, like, and I'll give you an example. So to me, one of the stereotypes is that people think that going in the rooms, we just talk about our problems and like, oh, woe is me. And like, so what is it really like?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different, as you and I both know from our experience, because I feel like we used to go to a lot of meetings
Yeah,
together.
together.
It's definitely different depending on the meeting. And I guess I'll preface it with saying, like, I would always tell clients and new people that I would meet in AA, and I'm talking in the past tense because I actually am not in the AA program anymore, or not involved in going. It was a big part of my life, obviously, and I highly would recommend it to people starting out, getting support, and even staying for a long time if they choose to. And I'd be transparent and say I haven't been since probably like 2019. So
Honestly, it's probably
yeah,
about the same amount of
yeah,
time.
yeah. And I would say being in the rooms, yeah, the experience is, at least for me, it was very different than what I like grew up believing it would be like. Because I had a parent with severe alcoholism, who's recovered for over 20 years now. And, growing up, I witnessed a lot of, different things as far as like uh, rehabs and going to different meetings that were like anniversary meetings as I got older and stuff like that. So I had this like picture, and it was probably more of like a, you know, judgment on my part of what it was like, because it's a lot of older people, my judgment is a lot of like strict kind of like cult like
Yeah.
beliefs. And of course that does come up
Yeah.
depending on who you meet and what groups you're in. But yeah, the reality of it was that it, at least in my experience, it kind of was what I made of it. And I
Yeah.
definitely would say like finding the right fit is really important. So for anyone starting out, like, yeah, I always say like try at least like 6 different meetings.
Yeah.
Now they have online, which back in our day they didn't. They
I know. There was
didn't.
no online.
It's like just try different things, see where you feel comfortable, where you feel like you're like kind of connecting in some way, like connecting to the message,
Yeah.
connecting to some of the people there, possibly. It's not really important at first, but eventually if you want to choose a sponsor and get a community around you, then yeah, you want to feel like, okay, these are some people that I feel comfortable talking to, I can possibly start to like hang out with or go to the diner with or something like after, like that's kind of where the community starts to build. But yeah, I felt like it was a very, depending on the meeting, and I had a couple of really good ones that I stayed with for a long time, like very welcoming,
Yeah.
wide range of gender, age, all of that.
Wide range.
Yeah, and very like meeting me where I was at, which I
Yeah.
really needed, because I was like a very much like had an idea. Like we don't want to be told what to do. Like, you know what I mean? Like we know everything.
Exactly. No, I get
So
it.
yeah, so it was like I was humbled a lot by certain people I met. And like I would say it was very much like helpful for me at the time. Like
Yeah.
I needed that, and I think like when the spirituality component came in and became very strong in my life and has stayed, like that was really like the main gift of the program for me, was
Wow.
finding that relationship with a higher power. And also like that really came to me through the community part.
Yeah.
Because I was told by people like their experience in it, and I started to understand more instead of having this like idea or judgment.
Yeah. Now let me ask you this. Like you said, you haven't been in the rooms of AA since 2019. This is a question I get a lot, and I'd love to ask you.
Yeah.
How do you stay sober?
Yeah. I would say the first main thing is like prayer and like having a solid, emotional kind of regulation standpoint, and also the spirituality, like prayer.
Yes.
So it's like learning, big part of my own personal journey has been like learning to take care of myself, which for I think is really common for women with a
Yeah.
history of trauma. So it's like, learning how to basically become, my own healthy parent, like reparenting myself. There's a lot of information out there about that today, but for me it really looked like not knowing how to live. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like not knowing how to live as a responsible adult, like not knowing how to like feed myself or like care for myself in the ways that is like considered, functional or normal, like
Hmm.
not having routines or having any like even like sleep, like the first like 15-20 years of my life, like I never had like sleep or routine or schedule.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of my like adult life now has been like that's been a huge part of my recovery, to be honest. I know that's not very much like, that's not like AA really, although it would come up in a community of like, people talking about recovery and learning how to take care of themselves. Like it would come up,
Absolutely.
like it would come up with a sponsor. I'm sure it's something we talked about in the past, but like just now as somebody not in the directly in the program and more like living in a recovered lifestyle, I would say that's a huge part.
Yeah.
For me, it's like learning how to take care of myself, having like compassion and love for myself so that I can have it for my family and others. That's been a huge, huge thing. Yeah, the spirituality component, and definitely like emotional kind of regulation, emotional stability and support. those
Yeah.
are like those are like the main things I could think of right now. But
Absolutely. So, one of the other things, and I've heard you mention this a couple times, even while we've been sitting here talking, you keep using the word recovered.
yeah, yes,
This is
yeah, I know. It's
which I'm all with you, girl. I'm right there with you.
it can be
But
confusing, right?
it can be. Am I
Yeah,
always an alcoholic? Am I in recovery? Am I
yeah,
recovering? Am I recovered?
yeah,
So like tell me what it is to you. Like we can't, I guess, give a
yeah,
definition for everyone. Everybody
yeah.
does what makes them feel best. But like tell me what it's like for you. Why do you refer to yourself as being recovered?
Yeah, I mean, it's so tough. Even like now, as you're asking me it, I'm like, am I recovered? um, yeah, no, I mean, like in the big book, there's a lot of like controversy about, and the big book, for those who might not know, is just like the AA book. Like it's like the Alcoholics Anonymous, like big blue book that we all have. I shouldn't say we all have, because I've actually worked with a lot of women, and this is no judgment at all. Everybody has a different story, but worked with a lot of people who have gone to different 12-step groups for years and never even opened a book or went through the steps.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think they just probably like went to meetings that were more like open or speaker based.
And I think that's,
Yeah,
that really hits home on what you said. Go to at least 6 meetings.
go to different kinds
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Mignon and I were in the we were in the, I guess you could say, school of thought, or like, I don't know what to call it, like sector, which was more like big book step study based
Yeah.
meetings. And I don't know, I just felt it must be that like analytical mind, or just like
Yeah.
I need a book. I need like something to read, or, I need to have like concrete stuff. So I just really loved and stayed with that. And then there's definitely a lot of people that don't end up going that route, and it's just their route. But yeah, in the big book, it does use the word recovered. At least from what I can remember, it's been a long time. But they say different things like that we do recover, and they use the language of the word recovered. It doesn't seem like it's really, it felt more that it was part of the culture for me, and correct me if I'm wrong because it's been a long time, but it felt like it was part of the culture for me that I picked up on, like this idea of that we're always recovering and like we're never recovered. Like that seemed more of a idea than something that any of us had like, a black and white like description of. So I don't know. When I say recovered, it feels more for me like I'm living just a completely different way now,
Yeah.
than I was for that really tough kind of like prolonged period of time where I was just kind of surviving, and really, obviously depressed and like didn't want to live at times. Like that is not the same. And not to say you can't be sober for a long time and not want to live. Like that can happen. Like emotions are hard, especially when we're sober, like don't have the substances anymore. You know what I mean? Like
To cover that up. Absolutely.
it gets rough in recovery too. It's just, I feel like it's just a different life, and of course, I'm not going to just like start playing around with drugs and alcohol again, like just for fun. Like I like logically know that that's not something I can do safely. It's just, for me, I do feel that I'm recovered from like that way of thinking and
Yeah.
like that way of living. And I don't know, just like kind of being lost. Like
Yeah.
that's really what it was. So yeah,
I
I like
know.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I know. Like, I know in the big book it talks about, like you said, that analytical mindset, like needing something to study. I mean, the steps and the principles are at the front of the
Right.
most most 12-step program rooms.
Yeah.
And realizing, like, Bill and Bob talk about being recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And to me, that just like hits home for everything, right? Because as you are struggling with your addiction, you feel like that's it. Like, this is where I am. This is the end of story. Like you said, like severe depression, severe, like, some people just not even wanting to continue to go on. So you're in that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body because you're killing your body, because you're like ingesting all of these either substances or alcohol, or oftentimes, especially now, often both.
Right.
And I think that is, it's just, to me, like, people identify themselves however they see fit. There is one, I was watching a movie and I can't think of it right now. It actually was a documentary. I'm like a big documentary person. And the person talked about how I live a life of recovery. And I was like, that kind of, I can vibe with that. Like, that kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, I'm very much so, like, I study a lot of mindset stuff. I try to be, as much as humanly possible, very cognizant of the words that I use, especially when describing myself. And I think that comes into like a spirituality aspect, right? Like, I am, like, what is on the other end of I am is a huge deal to me.
I have chills.
Yeah, like, it's a huge deal to me,
so
like
important.
what I put on the end of it. And so, but then again, for me to identify myself as an alcoholic in a meeting, to me, was important. I needed that in early sobriety because, like you mentioned, in the very beginning, I was in denial. No, this can't be, this cannot be.
Right.
What, like, it just cannot. Like,
that's someone else. That's for someone else.
I'm not under a bridge. I'm not drinking out of a paper bag. Like, this cannot be. And so I desperately needed that in the beginning to identify myself as that, because that's exactly what I was at the time. That's exactly where I was at. And it's funny because it's just, now it seems like light years away from that. And, I get that a lot of our conversation has been about like being in the rooms of AA or NA, like the 12-step programs. And what I've seen a lot online is people saying, like, there's more than one way to recover. And so I want to make sure that we touch on that today because, of course we would talk about that because that's our experience. But you, as a therapist working with people in, alcoholism, addiction of many different forms, what resources can people find? Like, where does somebody start? Like, I know I started because, like, one of my really best friends at the time, her husband was a member of AA, and he just took me to my first meeting, and I just continued on from there. But like, how can someone start who doesn't have that experience or doesn't have you had your parent who has been in the rooms of AA? Like,
and that parent gave me my first big book, which I took like 2 or 3 years to open when I was still drinking. He gave me the big book and was like, you might just, no pressure, but like, in case
you had it when you needed it. You had it when you needed it.
Yeah.
But not everybody has.
Not everybody has that at all. I mean, a lot of people have no one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of resources, which I didn't realize until I was a therapist and I worked for a hospital system those 5 years. Now I have my own online practice since 2020, but those 5 years, I kind of learned a lot. I didn't know about all the different treatment options like until I was in that world, because we had to always like refer and get people from places and then send them somewhere else, like that kind of a thing.
Okay.
But there's I can't remember how to say it, but there's that government website is always a good resource for people. Samsha or I can't remember right now. It's like
I'll find the link, or you could send it to me and I'll post it with this video.
Yeah, and that way, I mean, they could just call them. They could also just search on that website for treatment options, and there's so many different ways of getting treatment. Obviously, it depends on your insurance. If you don't have any insurance, you would have to go through somewhere that has funding, like a state program. But yeah, people can get into treatment that way. I would imagine now, and this is something I don't know for sure, but I would imagine they can also call the 988 like hotline to get kind of redirected for resources as well.
What is the 988 number?
That one is just the crisis hotline that the United States has now. Instead of 911 for mental health, they have 988 now.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So it's kind of like rolled out the last couple of years, and people are able to use it obviously for current suicidal thoughts. But I would imagine, and I may be wrong in saying this, I would imagine they can also call for resources, or just to be like transferred or redirected to the right line, like the SAMHSA government line for getting support. So I would say like that's like the maybe like more medical route.
Okay.
Getting treatment, finding treatment, like not giving up. You know what I mean? That's a hard one, especially in our healthcare system. Yeah. That's a hard one, but like just know that like there are programs out there that are funded if you have no money. Like there's programs out there that are government run. Obviously, they're not going to be as nice as like Seabrook or like something that that takes like your insurance and is like kind of like more of a wellness center vibe. There's places, there's a whole range and spectrum. So I would say like keep trying, don't give up. Try the government website, try the hotline. Nice. Obviously, you need to be willing to do any of that, and for a lot of us, that is like that ingredient takes a while.
It does.
The ingredient of willingness is like it takes a while. That's why the whole.
Sometimes you have to be, or I feel like a lot of times you have to be humbled into willing.
Yeah. So that's obviously like a side note to this conversation is like, are you willing? You know what I mean? Like, what are you willing to do?
Yeah, because otherwise, if you just stay the same, you're going to get the same results.
Yeah, and if you're not willing to start calling or looking into the government things, like I would just say like start somewhere. You know what I mean? Like pick up a book. Like, I don't know, like there's a million different resources online of people that are recovered sharing their story. You're doing this one now. You're starting this resource now. Yeah, like start watching YouTube videos. I remember doing that a lot actually in the beginning, just trying to get an idea of what I was dealing with. Like, am I insane? So like, yeah, reading blogs, like just like that will help you feel not alone, because you're not alone. Like I would say that you're not alone. So yeah, finding people online to connect with. I mean, that's the world we live in now. Like we're online,
absolutely. Right? Which is it's kind of crazy to me, but it's a good thing because 12 years ago there was no online community, so you really had to. To me, at the time, the easiest thing was to go into a 12-step program, so that like.
Yeah, they're everywhere. They're everywhere all the time.
Everywhere, and they can, like, I'm telling you, like these people, regardless of really what type of meeting you go to in most places, they will just like pick you up and like help you find those resources, because at that particular time when you're like still suffering and sick, you might not even have the mindset to be like, okay, I'm going to go look on this website. I'm pretty sure I looked up a few things here and there, but like, it was chaos. It was chaos. Like my mind
was all there.
Yeah. So, Okay, so before we end, I just want to kind of give, like, you mentioned what you did when working for the company, but you do a lot of work in recovery now on your own. And if you could just talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah. I also want to mention really quick, just
Uh-huh.
part of your last question. There's also many other, if you're not feeling the AA or NA vibe, there's many other programs of recovery now. So there's smart recovery. I know is what I'm like really just thinking off the top of my head, because obviously there's whatever. It's just a lot of different things that I've referred people to over the years. But there's refuge recovery. That's more of like a Buddhist based meeting and book. It has its, I don't have the book. I always wanted to get it. I haven't got it, but it has its own literature, like we have, like
Yeah.
A has, but it has its own. And it's yeah, so refuge recovery, smart recovery. Those are two off the top of my head. I know there's like a women's based one too. I can't think of the name. But there's more than just AA. I'm not saying that to steer people away from AA. It's more
No,
like
but it's good
find
to
what
have options.
yeah, like know that if you want to go to a support meeting, or even if you don't want to go to a support meeting, but you're just open to trying a support meeting, and you're like, AA seems a little like, I don't know about all that. There's more. There's more to try. So just, yeah, there's many paths to recovery. I'm a firm believer in
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that.
Yeah. As far as what I'm doing now, I'm a mom, so that takes up most of my life. And then yeah, there's a book that I actually wrote last year. I'm just going to briefly mention it now because I am not in the state of getting a publisher yet. But my hope is that I have it eventually published, and I'm creating now like a separate website for that whole kind of situation. So I'm hoping to be able to have like, a place for that book to live and be connecting it with the people that it would truly be able to serve. I basically wrote a book that I feel like would have helped me when I was teen, early 20s. So it's very much addiction recovery, trauma recovery, and like spirituality based. So for anyone who feels confused about the spirituality component, that was my hope, to be able to break that down to a very like easily understandable and like reachable way, at least in the way that has helped me.
Yeah.
So that, and the way that I kind of have worked with people in a clinical way. So it's in there, it's in the ethers. I had to shelf it after I wrote the first draft for a little bit. I had some health issues, and then I'm hoping in the next year or so to get it kind of edited and out there. So that's been like my main focus. That's been a lot of my energy as far as recovery stuff. Otherwise, yeah, I just work with people as my main job. So I just do like one-on-one, kind of like this because it's a video.
Yeah.
I do one-on-one therapy in a video setting. From my house.
Okay.
And that's been my work. It's worked really well for me to be able to do that while being a mom. So
excellent.
yeah,
Well,
and
I will also, along with this video, post your information in case somebody wants to get in touch.
Cool. Yeah, of course.
That'll be awesome. And of course, when your book comes out,
one day.
Maybe we can meet again and we can talk about it. I would love to hear more about it. All right.
Awesome.
Well, thanks so much, Melissa. I truly appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. I love you.
I love you too.
Okay.